Thanks, Raymond. So I would like first to acknowledge that we have the privilege to have the Honorable Dominic Cardy, one of our ministers here in New Brunswick, as one of the guests here for our public lecture. So we will speak about the flooding in the Great Fredericton area and how remote sensing and geomatics can help. So everyone remind, unfortunately, that in 2018 and 2019 we have big flood here in Fredericton. And these are some of the unfortunate picture we get in Fredericton. And we get some statistics from the Department of Public Safety. In 2018, 100 homes were evacuated, 2,972 properties were damaged, and this cost $72 million. In 2019, we have 201 homes which were evacuated, more than up so far 569 damaged properties, and they are not yet finished to count, and the cost is still to determine. So a huge problem here in the Fredericton area. So all remote sensing can help in this kind of events. First, we can map easily the flood extent. You could have like Landsat or Sentinel-2 optical image, but the problem, and particularly for flood mapping, this occurs in spring, and spring also is often with clouds, and so you cannot see anything with clouds. So this was a Landsat TM5 optical image with Remote Fredericton, and you see most of the area were under cloud. But with Sentinel-1, which is a radar remote sensing image, we have no problem to see through the clouds. And here, this is an example of mapping we did for the 2018. You can compare the May 2018 flood with the July 2018, which was dry, and the June 2018 level. So we can easily map the different level of the flooding using, in this case, is Sentinel-1 CHH image. In 2019, this is a kind of image we can get also. So this was a composite of different polarization, and again, we can very easily we get the map of the flood extent. Again, Landsat 8, so optical image, you see only clouds. So very difficult to do any mapping. At the end, in 2019, here we were able to map the flood extent, and we have 455 square kilometers flooded. And this is the kind of map easily we can make out of the Sentinel-1 image. Another use of remote sensing is to try to locate the flood-prone area. And one of them is wetland. Wetland is typically a zone when you have high risk of having flooding. This experience was done as part of a student project here in UNB. So close to Morrison Lake, we get a student walking into a wetland area and systematically take a GPS measurement. And then we compare three methods of mapping the wetland. One was based on satellite data, so remote sensing, based on Landsat and Allospalsa, which is also another radar satellite. The other was the DNR map, so the map produced by the Department of Natural Resources here in New Brunswick. And the third method was a method related to the depth to water. So it's another method. And we have wetland and upland class. different wetland, aquatic bed, shallow water, marsh, shrub wetland, forest wetland, and in upland we have hardwood forest, mixed wood forest, softwood forest, and shrubland. For the DNR map, we have the aquatic bed and then the different other freshwater, marsh, shrub, wetland, forest, wetland, and then there's no dry land or upland class because we only take the wetland part of the DNR map. And for the depth to water was related to the height of the water so this is the kind of wetland you can have. So bog, fen, marsh, shrub wetland, forest wetland, and aquatic bed. Now this is the resulting map we get from applying ALOS PALSAR and Landsat 8 image. So a mixture of the two, and we have very nice mapping done in this area. You see with the DNR map, we miss a lot of wetland. Simply the DNR map was made with photo interpretation. The problem of the photo is that the photo see only above the trees, not under the trees. With radar, we can see the water under the trees. So this is highly more powerful tools. So in this case, you see a lot of GPS points were not catched by the DNR map. By contrast, the depth to water or wet area map is overestimate the wetland in this area. You see that a lot of, so for example, I will give you another example here. Yes, so this is on the final number. You see that all our GPS, most of 98% of our GPS sites were correctly classified based on the satellite image method. Only 46.9 were classified correctly with the DNR map, and 53.6% correctly classified with the depth to water map. So this remote sensing is very powerful tools to do this kind of mapping. The problem with DNR map, the majority of the wetland sites were classified as upland, so they miss a lot of wetland. And for the depth to water, you have also this kind of error. In addition, you have also wetland site classified in the incorrect wetland class, and upland site classified as wetland. So I will show you some examples of these things. Here, for example, this is the wet area map, and you see that you have in the map, in this yellow area, you have, according to this map, a wetland, but you have building there. So it's something's not very good. And in the opposite, here you have this on the yellow square. There's no wetland map, but when you do air photos identification, you can see that obviously there's a wetland there. You see very easily the wetland. So miss the wetland. Now, do this map exist in New Brunswick? Yes. We have made a Landsat and ALOS PALSAR based method to map all the south of New Brunswick, thanks to the federal help who funded this map. And you see that the overall accuracy was 96%, and if you consider only the wetland, it's 93%. So besides to have wetland mapping and the mapping of the flood extent, another things which could be very interesting also for when you do flood related research is in the land cover change. Some of in the newspaper, you can see, oh yes, we have more flooding today because, for example, we have more clear cuts, or we have a change in the land use. So this is an example of UNB woodlot. You can see easily that we can nicely see the expansion of Costco and then the apparition of the highway in the UNB woodlot over the 10 years. So it's also a very powerful tool for making land cover change mapping. Another thing very important also when you do flood mapping is because a lot of flood is related to ice jam. We can also nicely map the type of ice on the river. This is an example in the Mackenzie River, and it's a courtesy of Jos van der Zand from NRCan. And you see the consolidated ice cover in pink. We can see this very well using radar image. So this is another use of remote sensing in the flood mapping. Another important information, here in Fredericton we have flooding because in the north you have snow melting. So it's very important when you do flood prediction to know what could be the water in the snow. So what we call snow-water equivalent. And here you have a nice relationship between the radar, again, radar data, what we call radar backscatter, and the snow-water equivalent. So this is another tool. Radar can be also a very good tool for mapping the snow-water equivalent. And another thing also is, again, developed by people from NRCan, Brian Briscoe, is water level in the wetland or in lakes and so on can easily also be monitored using SAR, so radar image. Conclusion, mapping flood extent is easily done from free Sentinel-1 imagery. I would recommend to use a combination of optical and radar satellite imagery for mapping flood-prone area. In our case, we have an accuracy of more than 90%, rather than the wet area map or the DNR map. By the way, the Landsat, Allospasa, Sentinel, all these imagery are free, available, freely now, provided by the different space agencies. So the flood-prone area map of southern New Brunswick is available and has an accuracy of 93.1%. And we have other remote sensing applications also for flood mapping, land cover change, river ice monitoring, water level, and snow-water equivalent. So this concludes the first part of this presentation, which is more related to remote sensing. I will let now my colleague Robert to explain about geomatics and emergency management.
Perfect. Can anyone hear me on the mic? Are the mics working? Perfect. All right, so I'm hoping to talk for the next couple minutes. Brigitte's done a really good job of kind of talking about the science of remote sensing and some of the ways. Some people can't hear you still. How about now? Better? Worse? Terrible? Oh. So I just have to talk loud. Perfect. We can hear you from back here. Perfect. Yeah. Back row? Yeah. Okay. I'm getting mixed thumbs. So I'm going to talk about kind of how we're using geomatics at the provincial government to help manage some of the different phases of emergency management. It's kind of well understood that there's 4 general elements to effective emergency management. And I've got them on the screen here now, and I'm going to be touching on all of these, perhaps a little bit more on response, since that's the phase where I have most of my first-hand knowledge, and that's the phase where typically people are sitting up and watching and paying attention, when they're sitting at home. There's lots of great work happening, and geomatics is helping with all 4, but I'll probably talk a little bit more in that one than the other. And to help make it a little bit easy to remember, you can think of mitigation and preparedness as all those things that happen up to an event, response is the emergency, the event, whatever you're responding to. And then the recovery is all those things that happen after to kind of get you, back into your normal rhythm. So mitigation, what it's all about, and depending on who you're talking to, there's some debate about what the first phase is. I am of the belief that it's mitigation. And what this is about is really, it's assessing all of those hazards, it's understanding risks, and it's making necessary changes to infrastructure, and perhaps more importantly, it's letting people know what those hazards are, what those risks are, what could be coming their way, and there's numerous ways that geomatics can help during this phase. Governments and academics have spent years mapping out the various risks and hazards throughout the province. The St. John River, as you've seen, and its tributaries are, they're no stranger to, high precision bathymetric modeling, LiDAR modeling of the surface, of the watershed, and not to mention the extensive work done here at UNB into wetland mapping that's helping to understand our waterways, better than we ever have before. Understanding these risks and mapping these risks are, they're one part of the puzzle, but we also need to tell people about these risks, educate them on the hazard, and to warn them when that risk is increasing. So for those that have spent any amount of time living near the river, perhaps one of the best examples that we have of understanding that risk and disseminating that information to the public is with the provincial annual River Watch program. So this program uses a network of river observers, water level sensors, meteorological data, and complex hydrography to create a series of water flow forecasts along the river at common points. And this is an example of kind of the output from that program. And the text is tiny, and I apologize, but what you're seeing here is some forecasted flows and water levels that are created by a team of expert hydrologists and river specialists at the Provincial Hydrology Center. So even though the font is small, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on here. And every one of those little numbers is important and tells a story. Almost every New Brunswicker that lives along the river, they know where they fit in this forecast. They know what those numbers represent, and they know the little nuances, like at 5.1 meters, the mailbox stand starts getting wet. At 5.4 meters, water goes over my road. At 5.8 meters, my house is inaccessible, and that kind of thing. And I see these stories every single year during the freshet on the news, and they're both they're fantastic. The people know their risk, and they're fascinating to watch. These are people that are listening to this public education effort. They understand the hazard, and they're able to calculate that risk for themselves and their families each spring. So, this is an example of how geomatics and computer modeling are helping to tell the story on flooding, not just in Fredericton, but the whole St. John River. And this is another. And so this is another example of how geomatics is helping, but perhaps is more easily recognized as geomatics, since there's also a map. So what we're looking at here is actually, it's the exact same water level information from the forecast created by the Hydrology Center, except it's being delivered via an interactive map instead of just that big chart. So this mapping application is actually the second generation of Riverwatch applications we have at the province that is published by the provincial government, and it's dubbed Riverwatch Mobile. So this application is actually created by a local group of problem-solving enthusiasts known as Civic Tech Fredericton, who we do have a member in the audience if anyone needs a connection later on. And each icon on this map really represents a common point on the river system and corresponds to a forecasted level on the previous chart. And it provides a really quick snapshot for anyone who's kind of trying to keep an eye on the river. And all the different colors represent different stages of whether we're in a watch phase, a warning phase, or full flood phase, which is one of the black icons. That's the highest level of the most serious level, the highest level of threat that's coming. And clicking on any one of these points, gives you a bit of a forecast, a multi-day forecast, so that you can kind of plan. You can educate. We use it to educate the public and warn them of that risk of flooding at various points along the river, so that they can take the protective measures that they need to secure their home, their belongings, their business. And we know that the public is doing just that. In the month of March, this website had a little over 11,000 views. And in the month of April, which is when we hit the peak water level, we had nearly 107,000 views. So, you know, essentially a tenfold increase of people just looking at the site. And in fact, I'm not sure if you can see the text from far back, but it was so popular that we actually burned through the allotment of free Google Maps hits that we had with the site. So now that's why it's showing that developer watermark on, because it was too popular. So, and as a side note, and on April 28th, when I was watching the Weather Network, they were actually using this website and the charts that it makes as part of their official forecast for the flooding in St. John. So all of these kind of activities lead into mitigation, you know, helping to get ready. But the second phase is, you know, preparedness. I like to call that the practice phase. You know, with mitigation complete, we've kind of mapped out our hazards. We've used complex modeling to tell the public what could happen. But in order, you know, to be ready for that real life event, which in this case we're talking about flooding, we've got to practice it. All levels of government have spent years developing emergency plans for all types of hazards, and especially plans for the spring freshet. So I've been running the geomatics response for provincial public safety emergency events for nearly a decade. And with the exception of our nuclear plan, which has its own unique set of response criteria that has incredibly strict federal mandates, the spring freshet plan is probably one of the most well-planned, well-trained, and well-exercised plans we have. Each and every year we learn from the previous freshets we have and make adjustments for the next one. You know, we were unfortunate enough to have been given several 1 in 100 year flood levels in the past, you know, flood events in the past 10 to 11 years, with 2 of those being this year and last. The benefit to that, if there is a benefit, is that last year's event was still fresh in the minds of many of the citizens along the river, and many were able to plan better. Many had worked over the last year to mitigate some of the risks that they can, you know, either taking flood-proofing efforts from their house, raising their houses, moving their belongings to higher grounds. You know, and for the interest of time, I won't be spending a whole lot of time on this topic. I think it's probably fairly well understood by most people, you know, the importance of planning and being prepared for these. And it gives us a few more minutes to spend on some of the more visual phases, which is response. So this phase, like I said, this is the event, this is the emergency. In our case tonight, it's the flooding. You know, if I could summarize this phase into, you know, 2 words, it would be public safety. It's getting people out of harm's way, it's taking care of them, it's stabilizing the situation so that it can be managed effectively. And you better believe geomatics can help with that one too. So one of the most important things that geomatics can do in this phase is to enable good situational awareness and aid in evidence-based decision making. So here we have an example of a mapping dashboard that my team uses to create situational awareness. So at a glance, a decision maker can look at this and be quickly briefed on the event and see what assets and locations have been activated. So a little bit of explanation. So you can see in here there are 5 different areas that are color-coded differently. Each of those areas has its own incident command structure inside of it. All of those are managed effectively from an incident command center. And as well, we have several emergency operations centers that are activated all along those areas, with the provincial one being activated. There's a big cluster of icons in Fredericton. There's a lot going on in Fredericton. But there's lots of things in there. At a couple key places along the river, you can see some water levels. You can also see locations of sand depots. They're the little pyramid-y kind of shaped ones. You know, the locations of those sandbags are in the plans that we use in the mitigation. You know, and sandbagging is a good mitigation effort. So it all kind of ties in together. Another thing, important note, on the right-hand side, there's a little bit of a clock. It might be hard to read from your angle, but it marks the time since activation, so the time since the event started. So in this slide, we're about 75 hours in. So what's important about that is, you know, when we're telling the public to be ready for these events, we tell them, you know, have your 72-hour kits, be ready for what may be coming after you. But here we're at hour 75. So if you had a 72-hour kit, that's great. well, now we're getting beyond that, and we need to figure out how we're going to take care of you, you know, because not everyone is ready for beyond. Not everyone's ready for 72 hours, let alone, you know, beyond 72 hours. So I've got another picture here, same event, same flood, but we're a little bit further along into the flood. You can see we're at hour 197 into this, and I wanted to point this one out because there's a few more things going on here. We can see many road closures in here, so the little barricade icon on there is our road closures. You know, there was one road closure that got a ton of attention from the media. You know, the second the Trans-Canada closed, it was all over every media outlet. But the truth is, there was about 150 provincial roads impacted by this event, and many more municipal roads on top of that. And in fact, if you look closely in the very, very upper left corner of the map, there are a few little red line features. And what that is that was the city of Fredericton was actually publishing on their open data portal all of their closed roads. So we were able, they were doing an excellent job, also using geomatics to help manage their event and to disseminate information to the public. And we were able to leverage the work that they were doing and incorporate it into our picture so that we could you know, have that full, complete picture of what's going on in the province. Another great use of geomatics is also in the upper left corner. It's those tealy gray kind of polygons that you see. And that's an example, an excellent example of some federal, provincial cooperation and data sharing. So those are actually the predictive flooded areas that were being provided to us from Natural Resources Canada. So they were doing their piece, predicting where the flood extents were. We were able to, again, scrape that data and pull it in so that we could see, you know, those polygons. And that visual data, we were able to do many things with it. One, we were able to put it in here. Two, we were able to share that with the Canadian Armed Forces, and they were using that data to plan their daily operations as part of Operation Lentis. And as well, we were able to share that with our property assessment folks at Service New Brunswick, and they were able to do their analysis on that to try to paint a picture of you know, how bad it's going to be, how many properties are we expecting to be affected, and what kind of properties are those. You know, are they, you know, open farm fields? Are they businesses? Are they houses? That kind of thing. Another way we were leveraging in the response, and another great federal-provincial collaboration, was the use of Transport Canada's NAS program. So that's the National Aerial Surveillance Program. Typically, this program does things like look for polluters, reporting ice conditions. Sometimes they even do search and rescue operations. But what they were able to do for us was they were able to take their planes and fly them along the river and take images for us so that we could get at that even higher level of situational awareness. Those images were all processed by the Emergency Geomatics team within the Federal Government Operations Center. And here we have some pictures of perhaps the second most talked about road closure during the event. And this is the road leading to Darling's Island. For those not familiar, there's an island and there's a causeway between the mainland and the island. The causeway is a little bit lower and is susceptible to flooding. And so on the left, you kind of have the mainland side. You know, you can clearly see the ferry operation that's going between. You can see the little boat in the water there. And that ferry was shuttling all of the citizens from the mainland to their homes on the island. On the right-hand side is the island side. And if you look really closely, it might be hard to see in the image. You can see where they've pre-positioned a school bus in the picture. It's the long yellow thing. There's a fire truck there, and I believe also an ambulance. And all that stems back to the mitigation and the planning. So, you know, they know if they're going to be cut off from the mainland, you know, they probably want a fire truck there. They need a school bus to pick up the kids in the morning so that they can get them to school. You know, all that is, you know, making sure that you're ready and, you know, have all these things in your plan. They all kind of tie together. So the response phase, you know, can last for some time. In the case of last year's flooding, it was 19 days. This year was 20 days. But probably the longest phase of all is recovery. This phase can take months, years, decades. And in fact, several citizens along the river were unfortunate enough to still be actioning recovery tasks from last year's flood when this year's flood hit. Again, for many people, this phase can be very visual. People can see it happening. You know, it's gutting drywall and the damaged belongings out of your house. It's making sure your property is fit to be in, that being there won't have a negative effect on your health and safety. And more importantly for most people, it's making sure you have the necessities, even if it's the bare necessities, so that you can get back into your home. And yes, absolutely, geomatics can help with this phase too. Similar in concept to our response GIS dashboard, this is our recovery dashboard. So again, using a map, emergency managers and senior officials are able to visualize the extent of the damage that citizens have reported. So every one of those blue health and safety teams to plan their day to determine what areas they need to go to inspect these homes, to make sure they're fit so that people can go back into them. As well, if you remember earlier when I said, the response is about getting people out of harm's way and taking care of them, well, you can see that kind of on the right-hand side of this dashboard. So this year's flooding, although it was significant, many people saw it as, better than last year. But that's still nearly 1,500 people registered with the Red Cross who either were evacuated with help or self-evacuated out of harm's way. 69 families couldn't find housing with friends or family, representing about 600 people that we had to take care of. We're essentially talking a small town of folks that we are taking care of and trying to figure out how to safely get back into their homes. Once again. And then once those folks have returned to their homes, their claims have been processed and finished, and they finish this recovery phase, we start over again. We complete it, we examine what went well, we see what needs improving, and we build all of those improvements into the plans, and the cycle repeats itself. So I think that's the last slide. Oh, we have some acknowledgements, and I'll pass it back to Brigitte for those.
From UNB, Brian Briscoe from NRCan, Joshua Anderson from NRCan for their input. So the Morrison Lake GPS field observation was ANR 4020 class, and the public lecture is sponsored by NRCan. So thanks for our sponsor. So now we are open the floor for questions.
Not all at once.
Any questions from the public? Yes? Another question.
Here, I think we're passing around a mic. If you can speak loudly, give her a try.
Yeah. Thank you, very interesting presentations. Question for you, talking about merging two images or data from two satellites, ALOS and Landsat. Each one has its own cycle. Did you have a problem with having them at the same time or during the flooding? How that will affect the process?
I would say that Landsat will be the most critical things because it's again cloud cover and so on. But Sentinel, and with the number of radar image we have, we can get like for the last flooding in Fredericton, we can get above about 1 image per day. So it was very easy to get the Sentinel-1 image. So, and we have not pop up on the top like RadarSat-2 and other kind of satellite. So I think getting the Landsat is more critical because of the cloud cover and so on. But already from only radar, you can do a lot of things, only from the radar.
That's correct. I thought you combined it. Question to Robert, or maybe both of you. You were talking about the recovery, if everybody allow me one second question to follow. Recovery, and you depended on people reporting damaged houses. Do you have a system of validating? Can we use satellite images or some system for validating?
So
I'm talking about sometimes some governments have to compensate or insurance for the flooded houses.
Yeah, so a little bit about how that program works. A few slides back, I showed where we have what we think is the extent of the flooding, and we can use that to figure out which properties are affected. But not every property that experiences flooding or had water near it will report that they've received damage. We encourage them to. By reporting that damage, it does a couple things. It allows them to have a health and safety team come to their house and inspect it to make sure, even if they think everything's okay, this team will go and say, it's made up of, electrical inspectors and all sorts of things. And they'll give the house a look over to make sure it's safe and fit to be in. And it also qualifies them, I believe, for some well testing, some well water testing, so that they can make sure that their house is safe. But not everybody chooses to report the damage. So if they haven't reported and they haven't told us about it, they don't make it onto the map.
Can you put on the screen there the map of Grand Lake there showing the... I'm Ted Brenner. I live in Gemseg. Everybody's heard of Gemseg, flooding in Gemseg.
Mm-hmm.
Are
Yep.
you all aware of flooding in Gemseg? Well, there's no flooding in Gemseg. The reason why they point out that there's water level is high in Gemseg is because the gauging station is right in the Gemseg River, just as it goes into Grand Lake. Nobody lives down there except for one person.
Yeah.
Can you?
Is it this one or the?
Well, I can't see. Let's put her out.
Is it the remote sensing part with the...
Well,
the
what I
big
can
yellow?
say is you have a whole lot of blue diamonds there.
Is it these things here?
This one or the one with the flooded
no,
homes
the one
on
with
it?
the diamonds.
Ah,
Oh, the
that was
diamond.
mine.
Sorry, this is yours.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And
There we go.
yep.
My God, that looks like a lot of agony. Have you actually ground-proofed those diamonds?
So all of those diamonds are people who have reported to us that they have received damage. So every one of those will have someone go out and inspect whether that's fit or whether it is damaged or whether it's not damaged. That doesn't.
One of the areas where those diamonds are at Robertson's Point. And the original farmhouse there is well up on dry land. All of the people who were looking for a summer place, they all built houses on a sandbar. That's what that land is. So a lot of those there are sandbars. Now I've gone and looked at the damage on the south side of Grand Lake. First of all, my own house was built in 1834. And I look down and look at where Grand Lake goes into the Gemseg. Now, when the flood was going on, the water from the St. John River was brown, came down to the village of Gagetown almost, and then went back up the Gemseg River 9 miles and came into Grand Lake, and you could see the water from Grand Lake being override by this brown water. The damage that you're looking at in a lot of those cases are things that are the cause of it is people building houses where common sense would tell you cottages that it's going to flood. The tradition in Gemseg is that it was originally French people living there, first settlers. They noticed the driftwood up in the trees, and they were smart enough not to build on the marsh. and people subsequently have not built on the marsh. Now, the people at farther up the river, obviously it was convenient for them to build houses there, to have a boat that they could tie the boat to the doorknob and endure a certain amount of flooding. Now, as you look at GEMSEG itself, you go all the way along, and there's no damage until you get down almost to the ferry. And a very limited number of people are there. I think what you have here is something that I think is not clearly representative of what's happening. It seems like you've got an awful lot of green there where there's not a lot of problems. You know, it's not a nice thing to say about people that you're building things on a sandbar. And the people in Robertson's Point, between Orville Robertson's house, which doesn't flood, and the road, it's unwise to build things. People have now, this past spring, jacked their houses up 10 feet or so. Now, one of the things that it's unwise to look at this and say, we're having this problem. We had this problem in 1957. It flooded the library at the Parliament buildings there in Fredericton. They brought all of the damaged books and stuff up to UNB to try and dry them out. We should have remembered when that happened that there's going to be a serious problem in the future. Now, we had a meeting, or a public meeting at the Lions Club in GEMSEG, and there were people who came there and spoke on the clear cutting and the nature of how the runoff is changing with time. And they had photographs of the province of New Brunswick where they had not just what you see in the newspaper saying it's going to be sprayed on this amount each year. They had where we have cut over the last 20 or 30 years. And there's a tremendous amount of clear cut. And the runoff is changing, and it's going to get worse. If you look at all of these things that are happening, we have to stop making things worse by making short-term solutions to the problem.
So one thing, yes, this St. John River brownish going into things, we can see this from the satellite. And in addition, in St. John River, we have an additional problem that tide is pushing the water in the opposite direction. So,
what is the brown thing there? Is that the brown water?
Yes, it's exactly what you described. When you see this brown in your backyard and so on, we see this from the satellite easily. So the things.
And this is this year?
Yes.
No. 2018.
Last year, 2018. So also clear-cut story. Nobody document if effectively we have more clear-cut or less clear-cut, and if this has an influence on the watershed. So here we have the possibility using remote sensing to go back at least to 1972 when we have the first Landsat, and even before if we use aerial photos. So I have here at UNB we have aerial photos of 1935. So we can easily do this kind of analysis and effectively tell, yes, this is a cause or not the cause. But these things was never done even the use of symbols image like that for flood extent mapping is not done here we wait from reporting from people, but not using remote sensing. And remote sensing is very powerful tools to see what happened on the ground.
I live in the J of GEMSEG there.
Yes.
The inconvenience to me is that you notice how the highway comes out, takes goes up the marsh and then across. The road was closed for about 2 weeks.
Yes.
Because of of the super elevation going on all along and coming into the bridge as it made the turn there to come into come onto the dry land on the left. When they went with the super elevation, they instead of coming up and tipping it down, they went like this and tipped it down so that a distance from that wall to that wall stopped traffic on the Trans-Canada Highway all the way from Halifax or from Newfoundland to Vancouver.
Yes.
It's a very simple thing to have changed that.
Yes, but I tell
The
you,
other thing too is that if you look at it from where the J is to the next place going to the west, there's 9 kilometers of highway that needs to be brought up. The cutting that we're doing, the clearing of the land for more potatoes on Carleton, the water has got to keep on going up.
yes,
Flooding is going to become worse,
the clear cut,
substantially worse.
the clear cut is not related necessarily to the potato growing, it's more related to the forest operation.
Pardon?
Clear cut is not really related to only potatoes grower, but it's also related to the forest operation. I can show you imagery.
All of those things are important.
I can show you imagery from Mount Carleton. You can see very well the Mount Carleton. Surrounding the Mount Carleton is only clear cut, and the Mount Carleton is intact because it's a provincial park. So, and we can see these things from all across New Brunswick. We can do this kind of analysis and truly show with data that effectively all this, what the people speak about is effectively the case or not the case. Now the flooding versus clear cut tell Switzerland people in the 19th century they need to reforest all their slope because at one time they cut a lot for farming and it was a huge flooding in Switzerland. So this is well documented in the history that cutting too much trees led to a huge flooding. This relationship is there. So, but here in New Brunswick, we need effectively to do this kind of analysis, and I never see this kind of analysis done so far. So, but we have the data to do this. Simply what we are missing is, I would say, funding to have the students working on these things.
Data for today is no good when you have cutting procedures and activities that are going on that are accelerating the problem. You know, it's no sense changing it to make it fit for today. You know, we have a problem there on the Trans-Canada Highway.
Yes.
Absolutely disastrous problem. And making stopgap solutions to it is not like it's been, as it's been done, is not solving the problem. We've got to make a substantial change in our thinking.
Yes.
And these photographs are what happened. We're interested really in what's going to happen.
Yes.
Because there is trends in what's going on in New Brunswick that are truly influencing what's happening in the St. John River.
Yes.
The other thing is, I came to the St. John River from Fredericton to Gem Site, became familiar with it in the 50s. And in the 50s, flooding was a good thing because it fertilized the agricultural, the hay fields and their gardens, and it was seen as a virtue. Now suddenly something that's a virtue, all of the runoff from up north came down, flooded and coated the ground,
Yes.
and made hay that grew like this.
Okay.
It was a very rich place.
We have other questions there, so I will let you.
The point here is a discussion of what, unless it's being taped, I think my voice will do. I think that the real issue that we're talking about here are the technologies that are used to monitor the problem. And I think with these technologies, the problems can be displayed, and then the decision makers can be charged with making a decision. I don't think this is quite the right forum to discuss what the solutions are and what the underlying problems are. The question here is we have the technology now, we can demonstrate, show the problem, so decision makers can make more informed evidence-based decisions.
Yes, so exactly what I just say. We have the technology, we have the things, but we need to use this technology, and it's not yet done here in New Brunswick. Yes?
Thank you for the excellent presentation. This is kind of a follow-on to that. In terms of, at the provincial level, with the new federal floodplain maps coming out next year, how you adapt those into your current planning, as well as how you adjust the risk factor of future floods. Like you said, there's been 2 1-in-100-year floods in a row. So does that change immediately what a 1-in-100-year flood is in this floodplain, or how does that change?
Great question. I don't have a great answer for you. I don't do a lot of, I don't have a lot of connection in with the folks that do the planning, but they do look at the plans regularly, and every year when we have these events, they use that as an opportunity to reevaluate what's in those plans. So I would hazard a guess that they would absolutely have to build those into whatever our new playbook will be.
Is it a technical question?
Technical question, maybe, yes, maybe the...
Yeah, just for a question, when you showed all the spots that were reporting damages, are a lot of those properties like potentially secondary or recreational properties, cottages, trailers, motorhomes?
Absolutely.
So is there a way that you could be more proactive in the spots that frequently flood where people have their cottages, that go there beforehand and not force them out, but tell them that they have to move their property? Like
Great.
spots like around Grand Lake that you know are going to flood, that people just going to leave their property there.
Can I?
No,
Not a
you,
chance.
that's
But
you know, on your,
Yep.
you know, where you had your cycle, you know, being more proactive
Yep.
and trying to reduce them.
absolutely. And some of the folks that have some of those homes, whether they be full-time or seasonal, have taken some mitigation efforts. And there have been some repeat folks who I remember mapping last year that I had to map again this year. But it wasn't all of them. So some of them are taking mitigation efforts. They're raising their house, 10 feet, or they're abandoning, or they're accepting buyouts, whatever they're doing. But absolutely, there's definitely room for a lot of mitigation in there.
Another question?
Thank you so much for the presentation, Dr. Leblon and Robert. I'm wondering, why you guys did not use DEM to kind of answer to that question of that homeowner that they are saying. So, because New Brunswick has DEM for the whole province. So basically the water flow can be calculated, and based on the amount of water and rain and snow, I think they know when flooding gonna go, and based on the parcels coordinates, they basically should know what kind of property is gonna damage, like based on the rain or flood.
So we do take a lot of that information into a lot of that science and a lot of that math goes into here. And we have a team of hydrologists that work for the Department of Environment, and they,
Yes.
how do I go back to me?
I can explain also that the water aid along the St. John River, the flooding limit is different from one place to another. We cannot use directly the DEM to delineate because of this difference in elevation. In this case, it's better to use directly the limit we can see or we can detect from the satellite images, instead of theoretically use the DEM, the elevation, to map the potential extent of the water.
How do I switch this one back to me?
So modeling is always modeling, so you have all the error related to model. What the satellite see is what the satellite see. It's not modeling here, it's what the satellite see.
No, my point was satellites show you the current situation, so what's happening. So it's good for to estimate the damage, what area is damaged already. But my point was based on the DEM, so we can predict. I mean, if there is rain and snow, all those calculations with a water flow, they can predict what area will be underwater after the flood.
Yes, but the satellite also are allowed to, like this case, to map the flood-prone area. So area when potentially you have high risk of flooding. And so this example gives a good example that for, you know, that this GPS point was selected randomly. We have no systematic, we have not select the things, and in this case, the satellite-based map was highly more accurate than all the other wetland map. So this is also another way of using these remote sensing tools is for as prediction, because the wetland map, the wetland are where you have high risk to have flooding. So more before the upland. Is any other question? Maybe Bob, you have a question or a comment?
I just wanted to find out what they're in here. Okay, back in the 70s, I know some people at CSRS are working on snow water equivalent in the Upper St. John Valley, and I'm just wondering what technologies are used in that modeling process before the flood season. Is that known?
What?
No, I know that during the winter we do have a team of folks who will go out and do some snow measurements, but as far as before winter, I'm not.
Before the flood season,
Yep.
they were using AVHRR imagery and other image types to map snow water equivalent.
And as far as I know, they are still doing similar measurements today. So they have humans who will go out and do it, and they also use satellite technology to figure out what's in there.
I can partially answer that question. I was Director of Water Resources from 1973.
Perfect.
And I can only partially answer. As I remember, we had very little satellite imagery of the snow water water equivalent in 73. We had measurement stations, direct measurement stations, and I'm getting some nods, so that's good. And we had the SAR model up and running just in time for the 73 model. And that was a big test. And I just wanted to make sure that you know that we also took high-level infrared imagery of the whole flood peak about 2 days after, or 1 day after it passed Fredericton, as I remember. That imagery should be around still.
It is. It's in the National Air Photo Library.
Oh, good. Okay. So that's worth knowing about.
73 flood?
In 73, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, since we have the Maclaggan Dam, which changed a little the hydrology. So, because in 1973 the flood was at the gate of UNB. Currently, we have not any more flooding up to the gate of UNB or rarely, because the Maclaggan Dam changed a little the hydrology. The Maclaggan Dam, one of the reasons was to protect Fredericton against big flooding. But since I don't know, when the Maclaggan...
Well, no, this is one of the things that, it has to be worked.
Yes.
The forecast has to be made very interactively to know what's happening at the dam as well, because they can make a slight difference.
Now, we have still, and this is something some young people wake up, there's still, even if everything is the same as before, the big, huge difference is the climate change. We still have more wet winter, and so more risk of high flooding because of the climate change itself. So this is also part of the equation also, and so this is a different things.
Right.
So I don't know if you have some question or comments or. Oh, we are 8 o'clock.
I have a quick question for Robert. Yes. As I was driving over from Halifax on the Tenterama Marsh, I was wondering if New Brunswick has any method to cooperate or communicate with Nova Scotia about that area in particular.
Great question. I don't know the answer to that one. I don't see a lot of activity in that area for what I do, so I don't have a really good answer for that one. I would be surprised if we weren't in communication with them, to be honest, but can't answer it confidently.
Thanks for the participation, and
Thank you.